Okay, we're going to get started. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Marty Smith. I will be chairing this evening's event, which has been titled Northeast Hustings. Firstly, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's come along, and it's great to see so many of you here. This evening, we've managed to pull together some excellent candidates who are standing right across the Northeast region. They are ready, or at least I hope they're ready, to answer some of the questions that are most important to you at this election. Our format tonight will obviously be somewhat different to our normal Hustings event, as we're hosting this online, thanks to Zoom. The event will be recorded by our facilitators, but if you do not wish to be recorded, then please turn off your camera or pop a message into the chat box just now to let us know. I'm going to give you a quick overview of how we planned for our schedule this evening, and just to give you an insight of what each section will entail. To start off, we will be giving the candidates a 2-minute introduction about themselves to put forward some of the key policies that they're standing on at this election. After this, we will move into a submitted Q&A section of the evening, where each candidate will be given the chance to answer questions which have been submitted to our secretary prior to the event. These will be read out by the chair, me, to save time and to allow as many questions to be asked as possible. After this section concludes, we'll have a short accessibility break for anyone to go and grab a drink and just get a bit of time away from their screen. We will then move into our second Q&A section of the evening, which will be open floor and put to you, the attendees here tonight, who will be able to ask questions by either raising your hand on the camera or by using the raise hand function on Zoom. Concluding this, candidates will then be asked to give their closing remarks and put forward a plea of why you should vote for them at this upcoming election. Throughout the evening, we would ask attendees to keep their microphones muted unless they're being asked to come forward and ask a question in the second section of the event. As with all our events, it will be governed by our comradely conduct policy, which has been put into the chat for you to look over just now. We would encourage you all to use the chat box throughout the evening to engage in conversation, but please be advised that anyone who is found to be repeatedly disruptive or offensive may be removed from the event. Now, let's move into the event. So the order which the candidates will introduce themselves and answer questions was picked at random just before the event by the organisers and the candidates. Unfortunately, Chair McFarlane drew a short straw and he'll be up first this evening. So
thanks very much to the organisers, first of all, for the invite. My name's Jim McFarlane. I'm the Scottish Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition candidate for Dundee City West. And for those that don't, maybe know about me, I'm a local government worker. I'm the local Dundee City Unison branch secretary, and I'm a member of Unison's National Executive Council as well. That's my track record. And why am I standing in this election? Well, I think it's because, we need a socialist alternative in this election. We need no return to capitalist austerity. It's the working class and the poor who have paid the price of this pandemic. It was the working class and the poor who have paid for capitalist austerity over the last 10 to 12 years since the crash of the bankers. And we have to be very clear that when we come through this pandemic, it's those who have carried us through that. Local government workers, NHS workers, retail workers, transport workers, all those people who have come to the fore, who have stepped up to the plate and who've put their lives on the line over the last year should not be made to pay the price of what happened over that time. And we also need to be very clear that it's no good enough to stand on a Thursday night and applaud some of these workers. We need to make sure that they are properly recompensed with proper pay and terms and conditions, and that includes in the care sector, who many have stood up to the plate and said have done great. Well, we want to see that whole sector brought into democratic public ownership. It's a disgrace that these companies like HC1 and others make billions of pounds of profit out of providing care. That type of thing needs to end. And I think that needs to be part of the debate, not just about, independence or who runs the Scottish Parliament. As a socialist and a trade unionist, I'm very clear. I'm firmly in favour of an independent socialist Scotland as part of a socialist federation. But I don't want to just change the flags. I want to change the economic system itself, the economic system that leaves millions in poverty, people reliant on food banks and all the rest of it. And my track record stands. I've stood on every single picket line in this city since at least the Timex strike in 1993, where my own family, my mum and brother, were involved in that, right through to the 12-week strike of the nursery nurses, to the recent strikes of hospital porters and pharmacy workers up at Nine Wells, as well as the recent struggles of social care workers to defend their terms and conditions. I will stand with any worker taking action to defend their jobs and their services. And we have to recognise that £120 million has been stolen from this city through cuts and austerity over the last 10 years. We want to fight to get that money back and to put that money where it's needed for local people in this city. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jim. Up next, we have Ben Laurie from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Marty, and I'd like to thank the RIC for inviting me here tonight. I do enjoy exchanging views and perspectives, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion tonight. I'll start with a little bit about myself. My name's Ben Laurie, and I'm the Scottish Liberal Democrat candidate for Angus South, as well as being on the party list for North East Scotland. I've been a Taysider my whole life. I'm currently an Angus councillor representing the Moneyfeith and Sidlaw ward on Angus Council, and I also work as a peer worker for a local mental health charity. After the year we've had, the Scottish Liberal Democrats believe that the priority of the next Parliament should be putting the recovery first. That means bolstering mental health services, doubling mental health counsellors, and cutting waiting times, which I know from experience were unacceptably long even before the pandemic. It means bounce back support for pupils in schools, narrowing the attainment gap and improving the well-being of our young people. It means creating quality, well-paying jobs for people in need of work and supporting small businesses after the pandemic brought our society to a standstill. And it means taking action on the climate, ensuring that our recovery is a green one. Coming out of the pandemic, we have the opportunity to rebuild an empowered, sustainable and more equal Scotland. If you want to put the recovery first, vote for the Scottish Liberal Democrats on the 6th of May.
Thank you, Ben. Kept that nice and short. That's what I like to see. Up next, we have Maggie Chapman from the Scottish Green Party.
Thanks very much, Marty, and thank you to Rick Dundee for organising this and to you all for coming along this evening. I'm Maggie Chapman and I'm top of the list for the Scottish Greens for the North East region. I'm asking you to vote like our future depends on it, because it does. Scottish Greens are proud of what we have achieved in the Scottish Parliament. Because of our approach in budget negotiation, that means more money in the pockets of low and middle income families. And because higher earners pay more tax, we have over £220 million more to spend on public services. Green budget deals over the years have put over 420 million into local services across the country. Libraries, community leisure facilities, cultural activities. We've won free school meals for all primary age children who need them. Our approach to politics has helped tackle poverty, protect public services, and ensure a pay rise for our public sector workers. But there is still so much more to do. And the pandemic has shown us that we can and we must do things differently. Because we know that a future controlled by the market is no option for the North East, for the workers in the fossil fuel industry, and for those dependent on fossil fuels, transforming our energy economy, creating tens of thousands of jobs in renewables, in digital, in care, in the arts. We need jobs that make the world better. Greens are the radical voice in Scottish politics, and it is the job of the radical to make hope possible. With this hope, we can create a better, independent Scotland. So the more Greens we elect, the better. We will have 1 foot in Parliament and 1 foot on the streets alongside you all. So please, vote like your future depends on it, because it does. Vote Green on the 6th of May.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Up next, we have Shona from the Scottish National Party.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to speak to you tonight. I'm Shona Robinson, SNP candidate for Dundee City East. Very pleased to be taking part in an online event, very, very difficult to meet in person. So it's good that these things are being organised. I think one of the key questions in this election is going to be who people trust to lead our country forward to recover from the pandemic, and what do we want to recover to. I think it has to be a recovery based on the right values and outcomes for everyone. We don't want it to be the poorest and the most vulnerable who pay the price. We need to ask people, where does the power lie to shape those outcomes? And I believe, and the SNP believes, that it's our right to choose our own future, and that the decisions that shape that recovery need to lie here in Scotland. And that's important because the SNP government has shown what can be done with the powers we already have, whether that's the NHS pay rise, only possible because power lies here, or the doubling of the Scottish Child Payment, again, only possible because that power lies here, or being able to halve our greenhouse gas emissions since 1990 and be on track to deliver net zero emissions by 2045, again, only possible because the power lies here. So imagine what more we could do with the powers of a normal, independent nation. And of course, we have already announced a number of key policies going forward. I've mentioned the pay rise for NHS staff, a national care service, abolishing charges for non-residential care, introducing a national wage for carers, 100,000 more affordable homes with at least 70% for social rent, on top of the 96,750 already delivered, universal free school meals for all primary school kids, doubling the Scottish Child Payment, and putting ScotRail into public ownership as a flavour of some of the policies that have already been announced prior, of course, to the manifesto. We want to make sure that everybody is able to be supported as we recover from the pandemic, and we believe we have the policies to make that happen with both votes. SNP, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Shona. And last but not least, it's Mercedes from the Scottish Labour Party.
Hi everyone, thanks Marty, and yeah, thanks to Rick for putting on this virtual hustings for us, and for inviting me along, for including me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Mercedes. I'm standing for Scottish Labour in Dundee City West, and I'm also second on the North East list. I haven't run for anything before. I've never held a public office before. But I was convinced to stand because I've kind of been critical of the Scottish government and been increasingly exasperated by the lack of action on what I think are fundamental issues. And I think this has been really highlighted by the pandemic, where we've seen that the poorest and the most marginalized have taken the brunt of the pandemic, while a minority have actually made huge profits out of it. So I think we need a socialist recovery now more than ever. We need socialism. We need an alternative to the capitalist system. And we need to tackle the multiple crises that we face. So inequality, of course, the climate emergency and the drugs crisis, particularly here in Dundee. So on climate, we need to take urgent action because we've literally got 9 years left to avert disaster. And so I'm really proud and pleased to see our climate recovery, which has been announced today, which includes things like investment in renewable jobs in renewable energy, looking at introducing a publicly owned, sustainable, accessible public transport network, primarily buses, and also looking at housing, so making sure that new builds are zero carbon, and also looking at retrofitting current properties. On inequality, we want to make sure that people come before profit. We're looking at rolling out universal public services like the bus network, looking at bringing in rent controls because rents are just skyrocketing, and reforming the tax system, particularly council tax. And then on drugs, if I'm elected, I'll be campaigning for a drug rehab centre to be brought to Dundee to tackle the drugs death crisis and to look at new approaches because the old methods just haven't been working. So more than anything, I'm standing to put people first in Dundee, and that's why I'm asking everyone to vote for me in Dundee City West, vote for Owen in Dundee City East, and vote for Labour on the North East list. Thanks.
Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you to everyone for their introductions there. We are now going to move on to the questions. And the first question that has been submitted to us is from Connor. This question is, the GMB trade union has accused Dundee City Council of pay discrimination against women workers. Do you agree that the city has a pay discrimination problem? And if so, what will you do as an MSP to tackle this? Jim McFarlane.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Thanks. I mean, obviously, it's a burning question, and it's, GMB are taking action, but also Unison are taking action as well over this. And I think one of the things that's highlighted, it's not just restricted to Dundee, is that when these jobs were evaluated a whole number of years ago, through an evaluation scheme, actually, that certainly agreement that I opposed, even though my own union signed up to it, because, how can you do a proper job evaluation if you don't provide the resources for it? And it was supposed to be done on a cost neutral basis, which is just ridiculous. But even since then, the jobs that have people who have come to the fore over the last year, care workers, cleaners, domestics, cooks, all the rest of it, those jobs have been undervalued and underpaid for years. And that needs to be looked at. And that includes taking into account things like some of these jobs, like care workers, now have to have qualifications and registration with professional bodies like the Scottish Social Services Council. That was never factored in when these jobs were evaluated. So absolutely support any campaign for improvement of pay and workers. Not, as I said, I'm partly involved in it anyway through my own kind of day-to-day work. But full support to any group of workers who are taking action for pay justice.
Thank you, Jim. Bang on the minute there. Let's move on to Ben.
Yep, I do think more needs to be done to tackle this pay discrimination. I don't think it's a problem that's particular to Dundee, but I think it is something we see nationwide. I think there needs to be better data recording so that we can monitor this more effectively. I think we need fair pay for these women, but we also need to see more representation in high paid positions and in boardrooms as well. And also, let's be intersectional about this as well. There's inequalities that are faced by all sorts of protected characteristics, people of color as well. So it's felt even more when they share more than one protected characteristic. And I think that we need to bear the whole intersectionality in mind as well.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie?
Thanks for this question, Connor. I think equal pay has been an issue for decades, and it's a long-standing issue across local authorities across the country. Local authorities have, over the last 40 years, been cut to the bone, and they don't have the money, they don't have the resources they need to be able to deal with equal pay, to be able to deal with pay discrimination claims. British government in the next term needs to do is to make absolutely sure that local government is funded appropriately, and local government then has the power, as Jim has mentioned, we need to be very, very clear about what kinds of jobs we value in society. And the pandemic has made it very clear that the jobs we really are very important about getting equality of pay right. But there's also something very, very important about making sure that we pay people appropriately for the work they do. That is why the Scottish Greens favour policies like the universal basic income or citizens' income, where everybody would get a base fair wage that would be listed so that they would invest in their local economies, and we wouldn't see the huge discrepancy, the huge disparity of pay that we get across the board from central government to make that happen.
Thank you, Maggie. Maggie, I would just ask that you maybe try and start and stop your camera again. You were just cutting out a wee bit there. but we managed to pick up most of what you were saying. Shona from the SNP, please.
Yeah, thank you. These equal pay issues are not new. Some of them go back a long way, and certainly if you look at the track record of the SNP in tackling some of them, Glasgow is a good example where there were decades of equal pay outstanding issues that hadn't been tackled, and when the SNP took over in Glasgow, it settled them. I know there's still some ongoing issues, but it took the issue and resolved it by and large. In Dundee, we have already been actively involved, Joe Fitzpatrick and myself, with the council and taking on behalf of the union the issues that have been raised on both unions actually, and taking them up with the local authority. And we received back from the local authority a commitment that there were firm proposals to undertake the job evaluation of the workforce, which is important, which is going to be the kind of key way of taking this forward. And really what we need is for all parties to get around the table to start that process. I get the feeling that there is a willingness to do this from the local authority, and I think now we need to see action and progress being made, and I hope that that is something that we'll see soon.
Thank you very much, Shona. And finally, Mercedes.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm aware of the campaign, and I've met with Helen from GMB to discuss the claim that's going through at the moment, and I'm fully behind their campaign. I've already written to the SNP leader of the council to ask him to engage with all the unions, not just the GMB, to resolve this issue. And our current Scottish Labour candidate for Scottish Labour MSP representative for the North East List, Jenny Mara, actually raised it in the Parliament to the First Minister, because ultimately, as candidates have already mentioned, as much as the council may get behind this claim and wish to settle it, council funding has been cut and eviscerated over the past 10 to 15 years. So we need, it will be a matter for the central government to refund and invest in councils so that they can pay out for any claims that they need to and resolve the issue. So if I'm elected, then it's something that I'll continue to raise in Parliament.
Thank you, Mercedes. We're going to move on to our second question in our jobs and workers section, which is from Alan. Alan asks, how can the panel guarantee the wages and conditions of Dundee workers when a Freeport lands on their doorstep, which won't be as regulated as other workplaces? Do candidates recognise the negative impact a Freeport will have on jobs? Jim, please.
Sorry, just make sure I'm off mute. Now things people have started the speech and you hear you're on mute. I mean, my personal position and our position is the idea of Freeport. Let's remember, this is a Tory initiative. This is what it's about, right-wing, British nationalists basically trying to deregulate the market, to privatise everything and to create these deregulated workspaces. And everywhere that's happened, what's come of it is low wages, poor terms and conditions of workers for any of the jobs that are created, and they actually suck jobs away, from other areas. And I get that local authorities are desperate for cash and investment, but they need to look at the detail in that. And in my opinion, we should oppose the Freeport's proposals as they stand. We should stand actually for democratic nationalisation, public ownership of our ports, and have an investment in real jobs that can be, created in these spaces, such as, all the things that a million, speak to the workers themselves, speak to the trade unions, speak to the people who are looking for those jobs. What type of jobs do they want? So absolutely opposed.
Thank you, Jim. Next, Ben.
Well, of course, we do want to see more jobs brought to our local communities, but we don't want to see people trapped in poor conditions, poor wages, and unfulfilling work that's then hard to build yourself up and get out of and move on to better opportunities. So I think it's important that we have local jobs, we support small businesses, We have good quality work with good conditions, good pay, and backed by unions. And I just don't think these Freeport proposals represent that.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie Chapman.
Thanks for the question, and sorry if my connection's been a bit dodgy. As I said in the chat, time for universal provision of free, stable broadband for all. What do I think of Freeports, and will they deliver the kinds of jobs Dundee needs to see? The short answer is no, they won't. Freeports, the proposal as it is, as Jim has said, is straight out of the Tory rule book. It's an opportunity for tax dodging. It's an opportunity for legal for trading of substances that we don't want to increase trade in. And it points to the Brexiteer fantasy of low regulation, low paid labour, a reduction of health and safety in the workplace, everything that will be bad for workers, everything that will be bad for communities, and ultimately everything that will be bad for Scotland. It is a race to the bottom. What we need to see instead is a proper green recovery that focuses on investing in jobs in manufacturing, in renewables, in care and creativity, the things that human beings are good at and the things that we know we have the skills in Dundee and in the wider Northeast region for. Those are the things we should be investing in. We need to make sure that whatever our economy looks like, we don't allow low regulation, low health and safety, and low wage jobs to be the norm. That is not the way out of any kind of pandemic recovery, and it is not the route to the kind of Scotland that I want to see.
Thank you, Maggie. Shona?
Thank you. Well, it's for some of those concerns that the Scottish Government developed an alternative model for green ports, which are based on inclusive growth, fair work practices, and delivering a net zero economy. The Scottish Government listened to what businesses and communities were saying. Some of the concerns have been raised by others already tonight. And basically, the green ports would essentially be very different. They would pay the real living wage. They would adopt the Scottish Business Pledge, commit to supporting sustainable and inclusive growth in local communities, and contribute to Scotland's just transition to net zero. So very much with fair work practices at the centre. Now, the Scottish Government is holding discussions with the UK Government in terms of that alternative model. I think it would be right and proper that Scotland has its own model. It shouldn't have to take the Freeport model that the UK Government wants to push forward. I think the green port model is based on a different set of values and principles, and I think it could deliver some important green jobs for Dundee and for Scotland, but it is not what the Freeport is about. It's a very different model, and that's something that is very important.
Thank you, Shona. And Mercedes?
Thanks. Yeah, I oppose the Freeport idea, and I'm not convinced. I don't trust the so-called Greenport idea either, I'm afraid. Scottish Labour are pledging to take a local first approach. So we want to invest in communities and in businesses that are already up and running, or where people already are, rather than trying to attract wealthy corporations from elsewhere. We want to invest in the people and the communities that are already in a place, and as well as investing in things like a publicly funded national care service that's free from private profit, and expanding education training, expanding jobs in renewable energy, as I've already mentioned. But yeah, primarily looking at investing in and promoting and supporting people in their communities, so that we're not seeing this kind of mass migration to big cities. We want to make all of Scotland a great place to live in, and to spread the wealth, and to build community wealth building as well.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We're now going to move on to our second subject for the evening, which is housing. This question comes from, it's actually a group question from Callum and Kieran. states, Scotland is currently facing a massive housing crisis, exacerbated by high rents, excessive empty housing, and widespread illegal activity by landlords. What will you be doing, firstly, to enforce current legislation, and secondly, to rebalance inequality between landlords and tenants? Additionally, do you believe rent pressure zones or rent caps are effective ways to challenge high rents in the private housing sector? Jim.
Thank you. I mean, I think it is a burning question. I'm lucky enough, I still live in the same area of Dundee that I grew up in Adler. And I think, since the whole Tory right to buy legislation came in, and the total decimation of council housing, has been the root cause of a whole load of our problems in society, including the one that we're going to come on to talk about later, about the drugs crisis. But my position is we need a mass council house building programme. And I mean council house building, not this talk about social housing or affordable housing or anything else like that. We need to be clear that it's council housing, which is under the democratic control of elected people, who are then accountable to the people who actually live in those areas. So that's an important one. I think we also need in the private sector, I think we need rent controls. I think it's ridiculous that these landlords who are making an absolute fortune are ripping off particularly young people, but not just young people, families, because there is no other public housing, council housing available to go, who are forced then to take up private lets, ridiculously non-secure tenancies and all the rest of it. And we all know the dodgy dealings that some of these landlords get up to, even with the existing weak legislation that's there. So that needs really strengthened. But in my opinion, is mass council house building creates jobs, creates good jobs, and it creates decent housing.
Thank you, Jim. Ben.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of an issue with renting at the moment. I say that as a current renter who's had a couple of different landlords before settling down with a decent one now. And yeah, I think, in some cases rents are far too high. A cost of accommodation takes up most of your income before you even go on to other expenses. So I do think we need to consider rent controls just to keep that under control. I think there needs to be more accountability on the part of landlords as well. They make a good deal of money that would otherwise, if we were in a house, be going towards our own property. So there needs to be accountability in making sure that the living spaces that they own are kept up to scratch, they're suitable for the people living in them. And I think this is particularly important for young people and students who are often have to end up renting. I think it's really important that we keep those prices down and keep the living conditions up.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks for this really, really important question. I think one thing just to say straight at the start of this is housing is a human right. Decent, affordable, warm housing should be available for all. It is a fundamental human right. I think in terms of the rented sector and the housing crisis we face, we desperately need to build more social homes, whether those are council owned or for cooperative ownership. I think we need to look at the different models of collective and cooperative and social housing that is available. We desperately need to bring empty homes back into use. There are far too many homes that lie vacant, landlords, owners just waiting for the time when the market is right for them to sell those. We need to make sure that those homes are brought into use and turned into homes, not investments and not profit makers for landlords. We desperately need rent controls. We know that the rent pressure zones don't work. They're not as effective as some people hoped they might be. We need proper rent controls because, as somebody once said, the rent is too damn high. We need to work much, much more closely to secure and shore up the rented sector and to give renters more rights.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Shona.
Thank you. A very important subject. First of all, on the affordable homes, there's a commitment for, I think, as I said earlier, 100,000 more affordable homes, with at least 70% of those for social rent, on top of the nearly 97,000 new homes already delivered. And social rent, I would include housing associations within that. Council housing, hugely important, but housing associations do a really important job as well in making sure that affordable, high quality homes for rent are available. There are issues, I think, with the current legislation in terms of rent pressure zones, I think, of limited success. I think also each area is different. So what the needs are in Dundee might not be the same as the issues in Edinburgh, for example. So it has to be a policy that is able to be localised enough. There are issues with private landlords in terms of communal areas and repairs, an issue that has been brought to my attention over and over and over again. So we need to strengthen the laws around that. So there are plans for a new housing bill, which is going to do a number of things. And I would like to see included in that more powers to be able to compel private landlords to do the repairs, particularly if you're in a close where there's maybe half a dozen different private landlords. There has to be more powers, I think, to compel the private landlords to carry out the necessary repairs. The new housing bill is going to give renters more protection from unreasonable rent hikes, and I think that is important. We need to go further than has been the case so far. And just finally, there has been a big announcement about decarbonising the way that we heat our homes. I think that's going to be a massive investment by the Scottish Government in making sure that we can do that, not just to make the heating systems better within our homes, but also to create green jobs at the same time. And I think that would be a win-win situation.
Thank you, Shona. And Mercedes.
Thanks. Well, I'm a member of Living Rent, and I 100% support their tenants manifesto. So that's looking at things that some of the candidates have already mentioned. So introducing rent controls. I think these should be linked to the medium income in the area. Looking at giving councils first right of refusal for ex-council properties that come on the market so that we can reclaim our public housing stock. Giving tenants more rights to challenge unscrupulous landlords. Can't get my words out. Making sure that we have compulsory letting orders to bring vacant properties back into use, and ideally into public use, like for public housing. So that's in terms of tackling the current situation. But as others have mentioned, we also need to be building new houses to begin with. So we need them to be zero carbon. And I know Jim said it should all be public housing, council house owned, but I do support the idea of cooperative housing models as well. So I think a mix would be okay. And of course, I have to mention that I also support Dundee Student Renters Union's current campaign to end referencing fees. So so-called premium letting fees are supposedly illegal. But what we're seeing is that landlords often charge a premium fee for issuing references, which are becoming more and more essential for people who want to rent a home. So I want to see the law tightened up and to ban referencing fees for good.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We're going to move on to our next topic of discussion, which is independence. Dave asked, do the candidates here this evening support Scotland's right to choose its own constitutional future? And if so, how soon can we have a non-party political referendum on independence? Jim.
Thanks. Is that working? Yeah. I mean, I think, it's a clear key question. And, as I said right at the beginning, I'm in favour of an independent socialist Scotland. I'm not a nationalist. I'm not a British nationalist. I'm not a Scottish nationalist. I believe in self-determination for Scotland and the right of people of Scotland to have the government that they choose. So I'm in favour of that. But I also think we need to learn some lessons, because how we approach that and how you win a referendum is really important, in the sense of, let's learn the lessons. This isn't 2014 again. The British state, the British ruling class have learned some of their lessons here that, they were complacent the last time and they nearly lost. So let's not underestimate the power of the British state and the lengths that they will go to protect their interests in that. And that means building a mass movement, not just relying on, somehow Boris Johnson or whatever Tory government giving consent with the Section 30. Let's also learn the lessons of what happened in Catalonia, where, again, the mass movement there, the strike movement and all the rest of it. And also learn the lessons here about, not having any illusions in the EU, because the EU ran and hid while, you know, the Spanish state jailed thousands of Catalonian activists and stuff like that as well. But I think we need a mass campaign. That means demonstrations, that means civil disobedience, that means whatever it takes to win that right to hold that referendum. And then when that referendum is called, I'm campaigning for a socialist Scotland.
Thank you very much, Jim. Up next, Ben.
Well, I think many people across Scotland and the United Kingdom feel distant from decision making. They feel like their voice doesn't matter and that our governments will do what they please regardless of what we say. So there's a widespread disillusionment towards our politics and our politicians that many people, including myself, feel. And I understand that, you know, a lot of people believe that independence is the solution to this problem. They see Westminster as too distant and want their decisions to be made closer to home. And Westminster can feel distant to Scotland. It can also feel distant to the north of England, to Cornwall, to Wales, to Northern Ireland, and so on. Until now, the UK government has been too London-centric. I share that desire to see power brought closer to home, but to me, I don't think independence is the best way of doing that. And I support a third way, an alternative to independence or the status quo. And that third way for me is the F word, federalism. The Liberal Democrats want to reform the UK into a federal state, like Canada, like Germany, like Belgium, like many successful modern democracies have. This would see home rule for each of the nations and regions while retaining the strength and security of the United Kingdom. This would see power devolved as closely to local communities as possible, not just stopping at Holyrood, but ensuring that wherever possible, local decisions are made by local communities. So yes, I think that Scotland should always decide its own future, but no, I don't think independence is the right way. That's not what I support, and I believe that with federalism, we can see an empowered Scotland in a better Britain.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks, Marty. I am a passionate believer in an independent Scotland because I think with independence we can build a much, much better country. I'm not interested in independence from a point of view of nationalism or from a point of view of ethnic identity. I want to see an internationalist, socialist Scotland take its place on the world stage. We need to get as far away from the psychodrama that is Westminster as possible. There is nothing positive. We haven't seen anything positive come out of Westminster for Scotland for so long. And I think just, you know, Ben talks about a third way. Two politicians I know of who've talked about a third way. One was Mussolini and one was Tony Blair. And I don't think either of them or their proposals would really have delivered the kind of Scotland we need. But I want us to use the independence debate to rethink power completely. I don't want Westminster to devolve further power to Holyrood for us just to hold it in Holyrood. I want to devolve power to local authorities and below local authorities, to communities, to workers, so we can actually completely take control and completely reform how we make decisions in this country, how we view politics. What we need is a very, very clear commitment from all parties interested in Scotland's future, a commitment to give power back to people. Power should sit with the people, not with a select few in rarefied offices, whether those offices are in Edinburgh or in London. So I think we need to be very, very clear. Over the course of the next Parliament, the Greens will back a referendum bill, and we will campaign very, very strongly for independence, because we see that as the only future for Scotland to take its place on the world stage as a leader in renewables, as a leader in a different kind of energy economy, as a leader for peace, as a leader for reaching out to people and being an open and welcoming country in the world.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Shona.
Thanks. Very much agree with some of the things Maggie was saying there. I mean, it won't surprise people to say that I think Scotland should have the right to choose, and we should choose independence as the way forward. In terms of when that should be, as Nicola Sturgeon has said, we are dealing with the pandemic, the immediate crisis of the pandemic, and therefore it should be after that crisis, and therefore in the first half of the next parliamentary term. And like others have said, I mean, for me, independence has never been about taking one flag down and putting another flag up. It's about what independence can deliver in terms of social justice and fairness, having all of the powers to be able to create that fairer society, over welfare power, over tax benefits, over the economy. And I think what has also changed in terms of the debate, and it's right, it isn't the same debate back in 2014, is that we've had far bigger consistent levels of support for independence, more among women, among young people. So a whole generation was politicised in 2014, which I think was quite a powerful thing. I think also we have a very aggressive unionism at the moment. So we have an attempt to undermine the devolution institutions, not just Scotland, but Wales as well, with the internal market bill, with attempts to bypass and funding. And even petty things like the Scottish Parliament wanting to incorporate United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, the UK government threatening to take the Parliament to court. So we have a very aggressive unionism. So it's not the status quo versus independence. The status quo doesn't exist anymore. It's a very, very different argument. And I would like to see us coming together, a very broad-based campaign, and trying to persuade those who have not yet been persuaded that independence is the best way forward for us all. And I'm very confident it feels very close now, closer than it ever has done in my lifetime. And I think we're within touching distance.
Thank you, Shona. We're very tight for time tonight, so I would ask candidates please to try and stick to just the 1 minute, and if they see the raised hand, just to try and conclude their point. Mercedes.
I'll try and be quick. So on the first question, do I support Scotland's right to choose? Of course. Yeah, I think the people, all people in Scotland should have the right to choose the form of government that they want. On the question of when, yeah, it's difficult because we don't really have, as far as I'm aware, we don't really have a clear mechanism in place, unlike in Ireland where they have the border poll. So we could look at getting some kind of clear mechanism which can't be disputed. So whether it's to do with polling or whether it's to do with a time period, like, you know, every X amount of years, because it is meant to be a union of consent that we all choose to be a part of. So I don't think it's unreasonable for people to have a say on that. But I think what has frustrated me is that the conversation on independence hasn't really been about what independence would be. I haven't really seen a detailed socialist proposal for independence. What I have heard a lot is debate about the referendum itself. And so it would be good to have some clear parameters on any referendum, because we might even have an EU referendum again in however many years. So I think it's good to have clear parameters in place, and then we can get onto the discussion of the actual issue. But as lots of other candidates have said, I think we all agree that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so that has to be the primary focus for everyone.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. Our next question is on drug reform. States Dundee is the drugs death capital of Europe. How do the candidates propose we tackle the drugs crisis currently in our country? And do they support the work of Peter Criken and his overdose prevention facility? Jim.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really good question. I mean, to take it in the reverse order, do I support that? Absolutely. I think I support any kind of harm reduction approaches that are there. I spent 10 years working in the local drugs service, when it was first of all the drug and alcohol team, then it was the integrated substance misuse service, and now it's the Dundee drug and alcohol recovery service. And I think we need radical change here. We first of all have to recognise the root causes of the whole thing, you know, which is poverty, which is trauma, which is, you know, all the stuff that we've just talked about poor housing and poor access to services and stuff like that. And we have to recognise, let's remember that the Scottish Government cut funding to the alcohol and drug partnerships over the last few years. We need real investment in that. And that means not just more nurses and medical staff in that area, but we need more social work type staff in there as well to support families all the way through that, not just when it gets to crisis point. And it's a disgrace that still people have to wait months for access to support and treatment. And I agree, even this thing people talked earlier about rehab and rehab centres, absolutely support that. But that's only be a part of how we do that. Okay, sorry, I'll finish there. But, you know, it's not just about rehab.
Thank you very much, Jim. Ben.
Yeah, let's remember that the war on drugs is a deeply failed strategy with racist and classist roots. I think that the best thing we could do is decriminalise drugs across the UK and certainly immediately create a legalised and regulated and taxed market for cannabis. But that's at the UK level. I'll stick to the Scottish level. I think you know, the whole criminal justice approach is deeply flawed, and we need to take a much more harm reduction stance. You know, we need to be introducing safe testing facilities to clubs and to festivals to make sure that people aren't taking substances that they're not sure what they are and dying because of it. We need to support safe needle exchanges to reduce the transmission of AIDS and HIV. And also we need to introduce safe consumption centres like Peter Crichton's doing in Glasgow. I attended the talk that RIC hosted on Zoom with Peter Crichton, and I think it's absolutely amazing, and Dundee should be first in line for one of these centres. I think ideally we'd like to see a brick and mortar overdose prevention centre where people can go and safely consume, but where there's also in-house services like housing, welfare, benefits advice, because this is a really complex issue with a lot of different dynamics going on. But let's remember that not all drug use is problematic. I think 90% of drug use isn't problematic. So let's not waste all our resources on police pursuits and finding this, and let's just bring it into a regulated market where we can actually focus on the people that do need our help.
Thank you very much, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks very much. Just very quickly on Peter Crichton's campaign and proposals, absolutely support them 100%. I think, you know, the Scottish Greens see the drug issue that we have in Scotland as a public health issue. It's not a criminal justice issue, and it shouldn't be treated as such. We need to make sure that we have very, very clear powers over all drug regulations. It's something that I argued for as part of the Smith Commission process after the 2014 independence referendum and the unionist parties ruled out, vetoed. So, you know, we need to make sure that we get the powers that we need to take control of the drugs crisis we face in Scotland, but we also need to make sure that we use the powers we have. I would like to see the Scottish Government instruct the Lord Advocate not to prosecute drug charges in Scotland in the way that we've seen. But as Jim has said, you know, as we shift away from criminalization and to support and treatment, we need to think what's really going on here. Drug deaths, drug abuse, drug use maps very, very closely onto inequality. And if we don't tackle inequality, we don't tackle the drugs problem. I think there's also, the last thing I'll say on this is we need a very, very clear understanding that people like Michael Gove are quite happy to take drugs and use cocaine and yet keep it criminal for the poor. So the drugs regulations that we have, the drugs laws that we have are designed to keep inequality and to keep poor people down, and we should be doing everything we can to resist them.
Thank you, Maggie. Shona.
Thanks. I certainly agree that we need to take a public health approach that is absolutely vital. And the Scottish Government, I think, has recognised, as we all have, that more needed to be done and we needed to do better. And that, I think, has started to show in some of the new thinking. There's obviously new resources, but it's not just about new resources, it's also about what you spend those resources on. And there's not one magic bullet. There has to be a range of services and they have to be available. And I think there have been some local improvements with access to services, maybe not as quick as we would like, but certainly there has been some movement, not at least on the back of the Commission's work. But we need to keep on top of that and make sure progress happens more quickly. In terms of the new thinking, I would certainly like to see heroin-assisted treatment here in Dundee. There is already a facility in Glasgow. I also am a supporter of safe consumption spaces. Now, we've had all the legal arguments. I think it would be difficult for politicians to instruct the Lord Advocate. That would certainly be a step that is not something that is done. Politicians and the legal system are separate. However, I think the Scottish Government has to look at how they can push the boundaries on assisting some kind of safe consumption space. Obviously, it would be easier if we had the powers, and of course I want all of the powers here, but meanwhile I would like to see them push the boundaries and see how far we could go, because I think safe consumption spaces are vital. And finally, I would like us to see a proper debate around drug laws. We even have the Daily Record campaigning for decriminalisation. That is such a different position from in my lifetime 20, 30 years ago. Things have changed and the debate has moved on. And I would like to see us build some kind of cross-party Civic Scotland consensus on what the drug laws we would like here and now, but also with independence with full powers.
Thank you, Shona. And finally, Mercedes.
Thanks. Yes, I support Peter's work, absolutely. I went to visit him in Edinburgh when he was there outside the Parliament, trying to speak with the then Health Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, who unfortunately wasn't available. I do think we should treat the drugs death crisis as a public health crisis, because that's what it is. I think it's brilliant, the work that Peter's doing, but it shouldn't have to be that way. He shouldn't be having to go out every day and run this van. We should already have safe consumption rooms. We shouldn't have had drugs addiction treatment cut consistently over the past 14 years. It's not good enough. And to hear the SNP government talking about their hands being tied until they can have independence, I think is just unacceptable. We could call for drugs legislation to be devolved. We could test the limits of devolution, and we could be making real change now, doing things like Peter's doing. So yeah, I think we need to take urgent action on this, and I'll definitely be campaigning to have a drug rehab centre here in Dundee, because I think it's evident that it's needed. But also on the point that Jim made earlier, it's absolutely linked. It's an equalities issue as well. It's absolutely linked to poverty, and it's hard to see how any of these serious issues will be tackled while we're living under a capitalist system. So we really need to get serious about that.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We are now going to have a very short accessibility break. I would ask people to come back at 5 past, and then we'll be moving into our Q&A section for attendees here tonight. If you have a question, please raise your hand just now. Okay, that's 5 past, everyone. So we're going to now move into our Q&A section from people who are attending here tonight. The first question will be going to Connor Beaton.
Thanks very much. I'm actually asking this question on behalf of someone else who's not here, Bradley. Bradley was asking, are we putting too much pressure in terms of trying to close the attainment gap on making people go to university? This question actually resonates with me because I didn't go to university myself. Are we closing off routes into jobs from vocational schools? Are we putting too much pressure on everyone to get a degree?
Thank you, Connor. Jim McFarlane.
Yeah, I mean, in response to the question, then I would say yes. I never went to university. I had no inkling to go to university. I didn't want to go to university. And partly that's probably my own background, because when I was at school back in the 80s, I can remember no one actually from my school even thinking about going to university, because at that time we were seen as factory fodder. You got a job at Timex, NCR or wherever, or in the trades. But, nevertheless, I do think, more value, that should be not on vocational, but let's also be balanced about that, because university education should be open to all, and it shouldn't just be seen for those who are well off or those who went to public school and all the rest of it back in the day. We need that open access to everybody to meet the educational needs and educational whatever people want to learn themselves, and so take away the barriers for that. And that includes, let's reinstate grants and all the rest of it, but let's also invest in trade jobs and training and apprenticeships, but pay them a wage, pay them a proper wage, not this idea of an apprentice rate or £2 odd an hour or £3 an hour, which some apprentices are on until they're actually real jobs, real investment.
Thank you very much, Jim. Ben.
Well, I think it is important to recognise what Jim said first there. It is important that university is accessible to people from all backgrounds and not just for the privileged. But saying that, I do think that there is a big overemphasis on university. I do remember when I was in 6th year at school, my whole Reggie class being like gathered together and made to write our UCAS forms, despite the fact that not everyone necessarily felt like they wanted to go to university or they were suited to. So there has to be other routes. I think that college is really valuable. I say that as a former student at Dundee and Angus College. I wasn't ready for university when I left school, so I did an HNC in social sciences, and that was life-changing for me. So I think we really need to be supporting colleges and further education, and that needs to be lifelong as well, not just for young people, but for people of all ages. And we also need to be looking at apprenticeships as well, and that's not just centered around construction, but also modern apprenticeships. So yeah, there's loads of paths. Everyone's path is different, and it doesn't necessarily have to be university, but we do need to be supporting the other routes as well.
Thank you very much, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks very much for this question. I think education gives us so much in our lives. It allows us to be critical of the world around us and to address some of the challenges that we face in the world, whether those challenges are how we deal with a COVID pandemic or how we deal with a climate emergency. But it's also about learning the skills that we need to function as society, function as communities. And I think pitting university education against vocational education is a false battle in a way. We shouldn't have to choose between the two. Our society, our world is made better by having both routes open, having a variety of education routes open for people, depending on their skills, depending on their abilities, and depending on their desires and passions. I think, making education only be about jobs is a failing of the education system. As human beings, we want to learn. As human beings, we are interested in the world around us. As human beings, we have passions and desires that we can learn more about to help shape the world and make the world a better place. And all of those aren't going to fit into one education model. So I think we need to be very, very clear that our education system should not only focus on education as a mean of churning out economic cogs for the labour market. It shouldn't only be about using one form of education, that universities, to keep an established elite going. Education is about enriching all of our lives, and we should make sure that it is universal and lifelong for everyone.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Shona.
Well, I was the first person in my family to complete university, go to university and finish. And it was a real opportunity for me. And I think it's good that we've seen more students from poorer backgrounds getting access to university. And I think the fact we've got no tuition fees is helping that. But it's not for everyone. So my daughter, who's 17, she left school at 16 to work full-time. University and college wasn't for her, and that's absolutely fine. We need alternatives. So the modern apprenticeship system, I think, is very good and offers really high quality apprenticeships. And part of the pandemic response, of course, is a young person guarantee, which guarantees a young person either education, training or a job, because we don't want young people to be the ones who bear the brunt of the recovery from the pandemic. And there is a real risk there in terms of them losing their jobs and losing opportunity. So it's really important that that guarantee is in place, backed up by substantial funding.
Thank you very much, Shona. And finally, Mercedes.
I forgot I had to speak. I was just engrossed in the discussion. Yes, I think probably there is too much pressure to attend. I think that's partly because it's seen as the only way to get a decent job, which of course isn't actually true, because many university graduates are stuck on casualized contracts. And in fact, academia itself is full of casualized contracts. So I think I do think anyone who wants to go to university should have access, and we need to have like a cradle to grave approach of free education at all levels, college, university, night school. But I also think we need to make it clear that it's not the only option, and that you can have a fantastic life without going to university if it's not for you, and there shouldn't be this kind of hierarchy of education in that way. Yeah, and abolish private schools.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. I would ask anyone who has their hand raised that if they have a question for a specific candidate, they ask it just to that specific candidate, or let us know if they would like all candidates to answer the question. We are going to take Alex Muir, who had his hand up first. Alex, if you can unmute and ask your question, please.
Hi everyone, my question is for all candidates, but if time's short, it can just be for Shona and Maggie, because I know that they should have policies on it. Did I ask?
Yeah, perfect. On you go.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So thank you very much, everyone. My question this evening is regarding LGBT healthcare currently in the UK. Right now in Scotland, we're seeing an average of 2 to 3 years wait time for people who are seeking an appointment with a gender identity clinic. The UK standard for a consultant-led non-urgent appointment is 18 weeks, and the average person right now is waiting up to 3 years. This is dangerous and unacceptable. The majority of doctors, when polled, even when they are willing to treat trans patients, do not feel able or educated enough on the topics. And currently there is not yet a standard of care or a standard of education, either at a medic level or within higher education. What do your parties propose to do to try and fix this?
Thank you very much, Alex. I will ask all the candidates trying to answer this question as quickly as possible. So Jim, if you could go first, please.
Thanks, Alex, for that. And I mean, I think, just even you posing it, posing the question answers it, in the sense of they need proper investment. People need equal treatment and equal access. And, the under-resourcing of all public services in our NHS over, the last however many decades, is the root cause of that. And we shouldn't be, allowing people to be played off against one another, or certain groups saying they've got a better or higher priority. And that means obviously part of that is then meaning education into with medical workers and all the rest of it, just as we've had to do the past of others who face oppression and discrimination. We need to challenge it wherever it is and fight for equality.
Thank you very much, Jim. Ben.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And as a mental health campaigner, I know that LGBTI people experience significant mental health inequalities. And that's not because there's something inherently wrong with them. It's because of the prejudice that they face, and also the hostile environment they face in healthcare that's just sort of been pointed out. I know that trans and non-binary people experience particularly high rates of suicide and violence. NHS gender identity services are under-resourced and with long waiting times, and there's much needed reforms of gender recognition laws as well. I think progress on this has been stalled because the whole political discourse around it has been marred with prejudice and transphobia that's really made it difficult to push things along. I think a lot of politicians are scared of kicking the bucket a bit. So I think that we need to be firm against transphobia. I think we need to recognize that trans men are men, trans women are women, and non-binary identities are absolutely valid. And we need to just press on with these changes and reforms and not get held back by the toxic debate that goes on around it.
Thank you very much, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks for this question. I think it speaks to a couple of broad points as well as the very specific points. And I don't disagree with what Jim and Ben have said around the need to invest properly in our healthcare service, to see trans people as legitimate agents of their own destiny. And the Scottish Greens are proud to stand up as stand up with trans people and to argue and fight for better rights for all LGBTQI people. I think Ben mentioned the toxicity of the debate around trans people, trans identities, and that moral panic that has been swept up has squeezed space out. It's squeezed real debate out. We haven't really been talking about these issues, and Scottish Greens have a very, very clear commitment to push for access to gender identity clinics within the 18 weeks that, as you mentioned, is in line with the NHS standards for other similar services. But we also need to be very, very clear about the consequences if we get this wrong. We know, and Ben's talked about this, we know that the mental health consequences for this far outweigh, you know, the challenges of not getting this right. So we need proper funding for the healthcare service. We need to be very, very aware of the mental health crisis that so many LGBT people face simply because of the alienation and the marginalization that they face in society. So we need to be tackling that for those phobias as well, to make sure that people feel accepted, people are accepted and welcome in our society. I think there's something very, very clear here for us around seeing gender identity as a human right and funding the health services to support that appropriately. So you know, in this space, we are very, very clear that we want to promote health and well-being across services in healthcare for LGBT plus people, and make sure that the services are there at the point of need, not 3 or 4 or sometimes even 5 or 6 years down the line, because the mental health consequences of that are devastating.
Thank you, Maggie. Shona.
Thanks, Alex, for your question. So the waiting times for gender identity clinic are not acceptable. They're too long. I've taken up a few local cases, very, very vulnerable young people, and it's very important that we sort that out. It is a very specialist service, so that will be a challenge, but even though it's a challenge, it needs to be a priority as part of the NHS remobilisation plan. You'll be aware that obviously the pandemic has exacerbated some of the challenges that were already going on around the pressure on our NHS, just the overwhelming demand for NHS services, so from an ageing population. However, I think with some of the new ways of working, we can perhaps get a system that is working more efficiently, and we can expand those services. So the remobilisation plans are at a very advanced stage. What we need to make sure, though, is that gender identity clinics and services and healthcare services for that very, very vulnerable part of our population are given the level of priority that they should have. And I certainly commit to arguing for that exact thing to happen.
Thank you very much. And Mercedes.
Thanks. Don't need to rehash a lot of what's already been said, but I think the answer was basically in the question originally, which is investment in the health service and training. So in terms of investment, we need to work on retainment and recruitment of healthcare workers. And in terms of training, we need to look at making specialized training available so that people do feel qualified to work in these areas, because as everyone's already said, it's unacceptable the way it currently is, and it's putting people's lives at risk. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We're going to take Johnny McKenzie next with his question, and if you could let us know who you want that question to go to, Johnny. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. My question is for all participants who've got time. Do we have time, Marty? Okay, no problem. Yeah, my question is for all participants, and it's a fairly straightforward question. Given that we need to obviously migrate away from exploitative and resource-intensive extraction processes in industry, people are naturally going to be left without a job from this process. So it follows that there needs to be a just transition to a better future. My question to candidates is fairly straightforward. It's what does that just future and transition look like from the perspective of a worker?
Thank you very much, Johnny. Very good question. We're going to go to Jim, and again, I would ask candidates to try and keep the answers, obviously a very important topic, but as concise as possible.
Thanks, Johnny, and I think it is, it's the key question going forward, isn't it? Because even when you talk about a just transition, it's a just transition to what? Because in my opinion, capitalism doesn't have any of the answers here to address, the whole issue of the climate, the future for humanity. I think we need to change the economic system as well. We need to get rid of the profit system. We need to get rid of the drive for profit and everything else like that. And for me, that's a socialist society. It's only with democratic socialist planning that we can really take up the challenges of the environment and plan for the future and produce for need rather than produce for profit.
Perfect, Jim. Thank you very much. Ben.
Well, there needs to be an element of training and reskilling as we move to a green economy. So the people that are currently working in oil and gas, for example, they need to be first in line for these reskilling and education opportunities. And I think we need to create jobs through large-scale infrastructure programs, upgrading existing homes with green energy, retrofitting with insulation. But also, I think underpinning all of this, it's been mentioned once already, we do need a universal basic income, because I think that what that provides is security and stability for people who want to retrain, reskill, maybe move into different areas of work, who maybe wouldn't have the opportunity to because they need to stay in the job they have to earn money. They don't have the time to go and educate themselves or retrain. So I think a universal basic income underpinning all this means that not just in these industries now, but in the future, we can have more just transitions and less instability.
Thank you very much, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks very much for this question, Johnny. We desperately need a just transition for the North East. I want to see the North East of Scotland being the powerhouse of Scotland's new economy, an economy that is low carbon, an economy that allows resilience to be enabled and created in all of our communities. And the just transition for workers in the fossil fuel industry and those dependent on fossil fuels is key to this. Not only will it allow us to transform our energy economy and create tens of thousands of jobs in renewables, in digital, in care, and elsewhere, but it's about making sure that we support the workers in those jobs now and we plan effectively. We saw what happened with the coal mining industry in the 80s. Thatcher decimated the communities because there was no plan. Now, that was part of her plan, and we need to make sure that we don't leave those communities and individuals dependent on the oil and gas industry without a plan. So we need to make sure that there is skills training and development, that there are adaptations put in place so workers can transfer into other industries. We need government regulation and guidance to ensure that for manufacturing bases like Ferguson's shipyard and Bifab, the government needs to specify that the components used in those manufacturing bases are in the Scottish supply chain, and we don't have to ship them into Scotland from the other side of the world. We know we've got the skills, we know we've got the resources in the Northeast to make that happen. We also need to make sure that we change our worker ownership and model of society. We need much more worker involvement in the decisions over the things that affect them. And I would like to see very, very clear worker democracy being very, very much front and center of our just transition model over the next 5 years.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Shona.
Well, thanks for the question, Johnny. I'm sure you'll be aware of the Just Transition Commission report, which the Scottish Government's considering at the moment, and how to transition to a net zero economy that in a way that's fair to everyone. And of course, it's going to impact on regions and sectors quite differently. And it has to be orderly, and it really has to be a national mission. Now, we've talked about a couple of things already that are important in that regard. So the decarbonisation of heating in 1 million homes, a transport revolution, the potential of Scotland's hydrogen sector, all of which will help to reduce emissions by 75% by 2020. And I think projects like the Mitchell and Scotland Innovation Park are a good example of Dundee leading the way, and I would really like to see that leading the way in Scotland in terms of the potential of hydrogen. We need to create those green energy jobs, but we need to do it in an orderly, proper way to make sure that people are supported.
Thank you, Shona. And finally, Mercedes.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's important to note that the jobs will be lost anyway, because the companies only care about the bottom line, about their profits. And as these fuels, these gas and oils become less profitable because of renewables taking off, they will just ditch their workers. They don't have any loyalty to their workers. So we need to get ahead of the curve by having this just transition, having a green industrial revolution, particularly for the Northeast. So when the person who asked the question asked about what will it look like, I was thinking more like blue sky thinking, what does the future look like for a worker, rather than specific industries. So as Maggie said, I think it's about worker ownership. I think it's about reducing the working day and the working week. So lots of people are talking about a 4-day week at the moment, but I don't think we should stop there. Looking at increasing the statutory minimum holiday pay and sick pay, and making sure workers are fully covered. And giving people more time to enjoy the rest of their lives outside of work, and hopefully it will increase more kind of like community participation. And we'll see, you know, I already see it a lot in Dundee, community gardens, community kitchens, coming together, working together, and yeah, enjoying the things that matter most in life. That's my vision.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We have one other hand raised, which is Andy Harris. If you would like to come in and ask your question, and to which candidates you pose the question.
Yeah, hi. This question is for all the candidates. If there's time, is there time for that yet?
Very quickly.
Okay. I'm a student at Dundee University at the moment. I'm sure most of you will be aware of the proposals that the university has quietly put forward to try and cut the pensions of almost 1,000 of its lowest paid staff. I'd just like to ask the candidates, what have you or your party done to try and challenge this unfair attack on workers?
Thank you very much, Andy. We're going to take Jim, but again, I would ask candidates to try and be concise in their answers.
Great question, Andy. To what I've done, I've offered full support and solidarity to the local Unison branch and the Unite members who are involved in this. I've helped support them in that, in the sense that I know they've carried out their consultative ballot and overwhelmingly voted for industrial action. And if and when they're forced into taking industrial action, I will be joining them on the picket lines, whether that's virtually or physically, wherever we can. It's a disgrace that the lowest paid people are getting their pensions hit when you see the pay of the people at the tops of the universities. It's an absolute disgrace and a scandal that, yet again, the lowest paid people are made to pay the price.
Thank you, Jim. Ben.
I remember something very similar happening when I was at university over in St Andrews with the lecturers there, and at the time I joined the protests that the students and the lecturers went to. I think it's a very underhanded move, and I would just encourage anyone who is affected by this to get in touch with me. Tell me more about it from your perspective, and let's have a discussion. I'm keen to get involved, and I'm keen to help where I can.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie.
Thanks. Great question, Andy. Thanks very much for raising this. As Jim has said, the Scottish Greens act in solidarity with trade unions, and I think our party's engaged on this particular issue. I've engaged more broadly on university pensions. I was rector of Aberdeen University for just over 6 years, and engaging with the USS and the university pension schemes. One of the things that often gets lost here is, as you say, it's the lowest paid workers who have their pensions chipped away more, and there's often not very much noise made about that within the university institution, within the universities as a community. I think we need to be very, very clear that any attack on pensions rights, any attack on people's pensions is an attack on their long-term sustainability and their long-term goal, and we need to stand in solidarity with them. As rector of Aberdeen, I was proud to stand alongside UCU and other trade unions on the picket lines, and I think we need to build that sense of solidarity and collective action around the pensions issue, because universities are using this as an attack line. It's seen as an approach to garner more security and more financial stability for institutions, when really it's doing the opposite. So I think we need to be very, very clear here that an attack on people's pensions is an attack on the sustainability of the institution itself, and we need to do everything we can to resist it.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Shona.
Yeah, we have already raised a number of concerns about this with the university. It is a concern. We've had a number of people coming to see us. I mean, one constituent stated that they anticipate that they would lose at least a 50% annual reduction from their current scheme. It's not acceptable, and we have taken up a number of cases with the university. We'll continue to do so and try to persuade them that this is a wrong-headed move and will undermine morale within the university, and we'll continue to campaign to stop that happening.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mercedes.
Thanks. Yeah, I support the campaign, and I've extended my support and solidarity to the campus unions and to some of the workers themselves. I've got a record of campaigning against pension cuts as a member of UCU, and I'm yeah, keen to support the campaign from the picket to the Parliament if I get elected.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We're actually going to now move on to our final conclusions for the evening, where each candidate will be able to give you a 1-minute plea for why you should give them your vote at this coming election. And following this, we will do a quick straw poll on who you think performed the best this evening, just to give us some feedback on the event. So up first is Jim.
Thanks, Marty. Look, thanks for everybody for taking part. And I'm not making a plea for everybody to vote for me, because what I'm saying is, if you think things are okay, if you think the system itself just needs tweaked a wee bit, if you think capitalism can work, if you think there's a good version of capitalism, then vote for one of the main parties. They support that. They've supported that all their existence. I'm asking you to support us if you think we need a real change. If you need a socialist alternative to build a socialist society that puts people before profit, that puts the millions before the millionaires. That's the type of society I want, that puts them first, that puts the working class in power. We are the majority in society, and our society has been run for big business for far too long. We need to change that in Scotland and internationally, and that's my plea. And my other point is this: is real change doesn't just come about voting in elections. Whatever way you vote, I want to see you taking part in the demonstrations, the strikes, the movements that will take place in the communities and the workplaces that will be inevitable, whatever the outcome of this election is, because that's where real change comes about. Real change comes about when ordinary people get organised and mobilised and take action. So thanks for taking part, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Jim. Up next, we have Ben.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for having me tonight. It has been a good, respectful discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and some really good questions about drug reform and trans rights and the like. So thank you for that. It's been a great night. The priority of the Scottish Liberal Democrats in this election will be putting Scotland's recovery first. So if you want to put the mental health recovery first, double the number of mental health counsellors and cut waiting times, if you want a bounce back for Scottish education, closing the attainment gap and putting the well-being of our young people first, if you want to create quality, well-paying jobs where people need to work and supporting small businesses that have missed out due to the pandemic, or if you just want to put the green recovery first and take action on the climate, then give the Scottish Liberal Democrats your vote on the 6th of May, and let's put recovery first.
Thank you, Ben. Maggie Chapman.
Thanks very much, Marty, and thanks to everybody for coming along this evening, for organising it, Rick Dundee. It's been a great discussion. Scottish Greens have the solutions for a fair and green recovery from the pandemic, which leaves no one behind. Only the Scottish Greens are proposing a very clear plan for this fair and green recovery that also tackles the biggest challenge of our time, the climate emergency. Greens in Parliament deliver. Just in the last term, we have won fairer income taxes that mean lower income people pay less tax. We have delivered free bus travel for young people, and we have secured a public sector pay rise. More Greens in Holyrood means we could deliver so much more. Our Scottish Green New Deal will see investment in renewables, in public transport, in warm homes. It will create tens of thousands of new, well-paid jobs that will protect nature for future generations and help rebuild the public sector to address the urgent challenges that face our country. At this election, Scotland has the opportunity to vote for the country it wants to become, an independent nation that can lead the world in environmental, social, and economic justice. Vote like your future depends on it, because it does. Please vote Green.
Thank you, Maggie. Shona.
Well, first of all, thanks to everyone who's organised tonight and all those who have taken part. It's been a really good, respectful discussion. The focus, of course, has been on dealing with the pandemic, and the focus needs to be on recovering from the pandemic. But the question needs to be asked, what do we want to recover to? And we want to recover to a more socially just and fairer Scotland. And the only way we can create that is by having the full powers at our disposal. The decisions best made are decisions made by the people of Scotland, people who live and work here. They're the best people to make the decisions about the future of our country. We believe that the decisions best made are on all issues, not just devolved issues. We want the full powers of independence, and the only way to deliver that is through an SNP majority government to deliver that second independence referendum, and the only way to deliver that is through both votes SNP.
Thank you, Shona. Finally, Mercedes.
Thank you, and thanks so much for organising this evening. I've had a great time with everyone. You might have heard recently Scottish Labour got a new leader, and what he said in one of his first interviews was that Britain is fundamentally broken. And I agree, and for me that means completely changing the system, changing the economic system, tackling the climate emergency, and getting rid of poverty, fuel poverty, homelessness, hunger, all of these things. I'm in the Scottish Labour Party because I believe that we can do it. We're the political wing of the wider Labour movement. And if you send me to Holyrood, you'll be sending a working class woman to represent the working class. I'm a trade unionist, I'm a socialist, and I'm a feminist. And I'll do my best to bring power back to the people of Dundee and to represent you and decentralize power, not just from Westminster to Holyrood, but from Holyrood back out into our communities. I want to tackle the drugs death crisis in the city by campaigning for treatment services and drug rehabilitation centre. I think we deserve better than we've had these last 14 years. And so if you agree, and if you support the kind of things I've been talking about this evening, socialism, then please vote for me if you're in the West, vote for my comrade Owen if you're in the East, and vote Labour on the list, and send as many socialists to Parliament as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone who has taken part this evening. You will be able to see on your screen, there is a quick poll. If you could answer that for us, and then one of our facilitators will be able to come in and give us the results of the poll before wishing you all a good night.
Yeah, I'm just tallying up the results now. I'm going to give people another 15 seconds before we reveal the results. And again, just to offer my thanks as the Secretary of Radical Independence Dundee for all the candidates who came along tonight. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope it's gone some way in helping people decide how they are going to vote in May. We're going to end the poll there, and the results should be on everyone's screen. And there is a lead for Maggie Chapman as the best performer with 16 votes, followed by Jim McFarlane with 14, Mercedes Villalba with 10, Ben Laurie with 5, tied with Shona Robison on 5. And likewise in the party support, we've got here 23 saying they'll be backing the Scottish Greens in May. We have 10 who say they'll be backing the SNP, 8 who say they'll be backing the Scottish Labour Party, 4 who will be backing the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, 3 for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and 2 who'll be voting for another party. So I hope this has maybe helped shape the conversation, help people make a decision, and I hope everyone has a very good evening after this.